Buck did not read the newspapers. He did not know that trouble was coming for every big dog in California. Men had found gold in the Yukon, and these men wanted big, strong dogs to work in the cold and snow of the north. Buck lived in Mr. Miller's big house in the sunny Santa Clara Valley. There were large gardens and fields of fruit trees around the house, and a river nearby. In a big place like this, of course, there were many dogs. There were house dogs and farm dogs, but they were not important. Buck was chief dog. He was born here, and this was his place. He was 4 years old and weighed 60 kilos. He went swimming with Mr. Miller's sons and walking with his daughters. He carried the grandchildren on his back, and he sat at Mr. Miller's feet in front of the fire in winter. But this was 1897, and Buck did not know that men and dogs were hurrying to northwest Canada to look for gold. And he did not know that Manuel, one of Mr. Miller's gardeners, needed money for his large family. One day, when Mr. Miller was out, Manuel and Buck left the garden together. It was just an evening walk, Buck thought. No one saw them go, and only one man saw them arrive at the railway station. This man talked to Manuel and gave him some money. Then he tied a piece of rope around Buck's neck. Buck growled and was surprised when the rope was pulled hard around his neck. He jumped at the man. The man caught him, and suddenly Buck was on his back, with his tongue out of his mouth. For a few moments, he was unable to move, and it was easy for the two men to put him into the train. When Buck woke up, the train was still moving. The man was sitting and watching him, but Buck was too quick for him, and he bit the man's hand hard. Then the rope was pulled again, and Buck had to let go. That evening, the man took Buck to the back room of a bar in San Francisco. The barman looked at the man's hand and trousers, covered in blood. "How much are they paying you for this?" he asked. "I only get $50. "And the man who stole him? How much did he get?" asked the barman. $100. He wouldn't take less." "That makes $150. It's a good price for a dog like him. Here, help me to get him into this." They took off Buck's rope and pushed him into a wooden box. He spent the night in the box in the back room of the bar. His neck still ached with pain from the rope, and he could not understand what it all meant. What did they want with him, these strange men? And where was Mr. Miller? The next day, Buck was carried in the box to the railway station and put on a train to the north. For 2 days and nights, the train traveled north, and for 2 days and nights, Buck neither ate nor drank. Men on the train laughed at him and pushed sticks at him through the holes in the box. For 2 days and nights, Buck got angrier and hungrier and thirstier. His eyes grew red, and he bit anything that moved. In Seattle, 4 men took Buck to a small, high-walled back garden, where a fat man in an old red coat was waiting. Buck was now very angry indeed, and he jumped and bit at the sides of his box. The fat man smiled and went to get an axe and a club. "Are you gonna take him out now?" asked one of the men. "Of course," answered the fat man, and he began to break the box with his axe. Immediately, the 4 other men climbed up onto the wall to watch from a safe place. As the fat man hit the box with his axe, Buck jumped at the sides, growling and biting, pulling with his teeth at the pieces of broken wood. After a few minutes, there was a hole big enough for Buck to get out. "Now, come here, Red Eyes," said the fat man, dropping his axe and taking the club in his right hand. Buck jumped at the man, 60 kilos of anger, his mouth wide open, ready to bite the man's neck. Just before his teeth touched the skin, the man hit him with the club. Buck fell to the ground. It was the first time anyone had hit him with a club, and he did not understand. He stood up and jumped again. Again the club hit him, and he crashed to the ground. 10 times he jumped at the man, and 10 times the club hit him. Slowly he got to his feet, now only just able to stand. There was blood on his nose and mouth and ears. Then the fat man walked up and hit him again, very hard, on the nose. The pain was terrible. Again, Buck jumped at the man, and again he was hit to the ground. A last time he jumped, and this time, when the man knocked him down, Buck did not move. "He knows how to teach a dog a lesson," said one of the men on the wall. Then the 4 men jumped down and went back to the station. "His name is Buck," said the fat man to himself, reading the letter that had come with the box. "Well, Buck, my boy," he said in a friendly voice, "we've argued a little, and I think the best thing to do now is to stop. Be a good dog, and we'll be friends. But if you're a bad dog, I'll have to use my club again. Understand?" As he spoke, he touched Buck's head, and although Buck was angry inside, he did not move. When the man brought him water and meat, Buck drank and then ate the meat, piece by piece, from the man's hand. Buck was beaten. He knew that. But he was not broken. He had learned that a man with a club was stronger than him. Every day he saw more dogs arrive, and each dog was beaten by the fat man. Buck understood that a man with a club must be obeyed, although he did not have to be a friend. Men came to see the fat man and to look at the dogs. Sometimes they paid money and left with 1 or more of the dogs. One day, a short, dark man came and looked at Buck. "That's a good dog," he cried. "How much do you want for him?" $300. "It's a good price, Perrault," said the fat man. Perrault smiled and agreed that it was a good price. He knew dogs, and he knew that Buck was an excellent dog. 1 in 10,000, Perrault said to himself. Buck saw money put into the fat man's hand, and he was not surprised when he and another dog called Curly were taken away by Perrault. He took them to a ship, and later that day Buck and Curly stood and watched the coast get further and further away. They had seen the warm South for the last time. Perrault took Buck and Curly down to the bottom of the ship. There they met another man, Francois. Perrault was a French-Canadian, but Francois was half Indian, tall and dark. Buck learnt quickly that Perrault and Francois were fair men, calm and honest, and they knew everything about dogs. There were 2 other dogs on the ship. One was a big dog called Spitz, as white as snow. He was friendly to Buck at first, always smiling. He was smiling when he tried to steal Buck's food at the first meal. Francois was quick and hit Spitz before Buck had time to move. Buck decided that this was fair and began to like Francois a little. Dave, the other dog, was not friendly. He wanted to be alone all the time. He ate and slept and was interested in nothing. One day was very like another, but Buck noticed that the weather was getting colder. One morning, the ship's engines stopped, and there was a feeling of excitement in the ship. Francois leashed the dogs and took them outside. At the first step, Buck's feet went into something soft and white. He jumped back in surprise. The soft, white thing was also falling through the air, and it fell onto him. He tried to smell it, and then caught some on his tongue. It bit like fire, and then disappeared. He tried again, and the same thing happened. People were watching him and laughing, and Buck felt ashamed, although he did not know why. It was his first snow. Chapter 2. The Law of Club and Tooth. Buck's first day at Dyea Beach was terrible. Every hour there was some new, frightening surprise. There was no peace, no rest, only continual noise and movement. And every minute there was danger, because these dogs and men were not town dogs and men. They knew only the law of club and tooth. Buck had never seen dogs fight like these dogs. They were like wolves. In a few minutes, he learnt this from watching Curly. She tried to make friends with a dog, a big one, although not as big as she was. There was no warning. The dog jumped on Curly, his teeth closed together. Then he jumped away, and Curly's face was torn open from eye to mouth. Wolves fight like this, biting and jumping away. But the fight did not finish then. 30 or 40 more dogs ran up and made a circle around the fight, watching silently. Curly tried to attack the dog who had bitten her. He bit her a second time and jumped away. When she attacked him again, he knocked her backwards, and she fell on the ground. She never stood up again, because this was what the other dogs were waiting for. They moved in, and in a moment she was under a crowd of dogs. It was all very sudden. Buck saw Spitz run out from the crowd with his tongue out of his mouth, laughing. Then he saw Francois with an axe, and 2 or 3 other men with clubs jump in among the dogs. 2 minutes later, the last of the dogs was chased away. But Curly lay dead in the snow, her body torn almost to pieces. Curly's death often came back to Buck in his dreams. He understood that once a dog was down on the ground, he was dead. He also remembered Spitz laughing, and from that moment he hated him. Then Buck had another surprise. Francois put a harness on him. Buck had seen harnesses on horses, and now he was made to work like a horse, pulling Francois on a sledge into the forest and returning with wood for the fire. Buck worked with Spitz and Dave. The 2 other dogs had worked in a harness before, and Buck learnt by watching them. He also learnt to stop and turn when Francois shouted. "Those 3 are very good dogs," Francois told Perrault. "That Buck pulls very well, and he's learning quickly." Perrault had important letters and official papers to take to Dawson City. So that afternoon he bought 2 more dogs, 2 brothers called Billy and Joe. Billy was very friendly, but Joe was the opposite. In the evening, Perrault bought 1 more dog, an old dog with 1 eye. His name was Sol-Leks, which means the angry one. Like Dave, he made no friends. All he wanted was to be alone. That night, Buck discovered another problem. Where was he going to sleep? Francois and Perrault were in their tent, but when he went in, they shouted angrily and threw things at him. Outside it was very cold and windy. He lay down in the snow, but he was too cold to sleep. He walked around the tents, trying to find the other dogs. But, to his surprise, they had disappeared. He walked around Perrault's tent, very, very cold, wondering what to do. Suddenly, the snow under his feet fell in, and he felt something move. He jumped back, waiting for the attack, but heard only a friendly bark. There, in a warm hole under the snow, was Billy. So that was what you had to do. Buck chose a place, dug himself a hole, and in a minute he was warm and asleep. He slept well, although his dreams were bad. When he woke up, at first he did not know where he was. It had snowed in the night, and the snow now lay thick and heavy above him. Suddenly, he was afraid. The fear of a wild animal when it is caught and cannot escape. Growling, he threw himself at the snow, and a moment later, he had jumped upwards into the daylight. He saw the tents and remembered everything, from the time he had gone for a walk with Manuel to the moment he had dug the hole the night before.
"What did I say?"
shouted Francois to Perrault, when he saw Buck come up out of the snow.
"That Buck learns quickly."
Perrault smiled slowly. He was carrying important papers, and he needed good dogs. He was very pleased to have Buck. They bought 3 more dogs that morning, and a quarter of an hour later, all 9 dogs were in harness and on their way up the Daya Canyon. Buck was not sorry to be moving, and although it was hard work, he almost enjoyed it. He was also surprised to see that Dave and Sol-leks no longer looked bored and miserable. Pulling in a harness was their job, and they were happy to do it. Dave was sledge dog, the dog nearest to the sledge. In front of him was Buck. Then came Sol-leks. In front of them were the 6 other dogs, with Spitz as leader at the front. Francois had put Buck between Dave and Sol-leks because they could teach him the work. Buck learnt well, and they were good teachers. When Buck pulled the wrong way, Dave always bit his leg, but only lightly. Once, when they stopped, Buck got tied up in his harness, and it took 10 minutes to get started again. Both Dave and Sol-leks gave him a good beating for that mistake. Buck understood, and was more careful after that. It was a hard day's journey, up the Daya Canyon and into the mountains. They camped that night at Lake Bennett. Here there were thousands of gold miners. They were building boats to sail up the lake when the ice melted in the spring. Buck made his hole in the snow and slept well, but was woken up very early and harnessed to the sledge. The first day, they had traveled on snow that had been hardened by many sledges, and they covered 60 kilometers. But the next day, and for days afterwards, they were on new snow. The work was harder, and they went slowly. Usually, Perrault went in front, on snowshoes, flattening the snow a little for the dogs. Francois stayed by the sledge. Sometimes the 2 men changed places. but there were many small lakes and rivers, and Perrault understood ice better. He always knew when the ice across a river was very thin. Day after day, Buck pulled in his harness. They started in the morning before it was light, and they stopped in the evening after dark, ate a piece of fish, and went to sleep in their holes under the snow. Buck was always hungry. Francois gave him 750 grams of dried fish a day, and it was never enough. The other dogs were given only 500 grams. They were smaller and could stay alive on less food. Buck learned to eat quickly. If he was too slow, the other dogs stole his food. He saw Pike, one of the new dogs, steal some meat from the sledge when Perrault wasn't looking. The next day, Buck stole some and got away unseen. Perrault was very angry, but he thought another dog, Dub, had taken it, and so punished him instead of Buck. Buck was learning how to live in the north. In the south, he had never stolen, but there he had never been so hungry. He stole cleverly and secretly, remembering the beatings from the man with the club. Buck was learning the law of club and tooth. He learned to eat any food, anything that he could get his teeth into. He learned to break the ice on water holes with his feet when he wanted to drink. He was stronger, harder, and could see and smell better than ever before. In a way, he was remembering back to the days when wild dogs traveled in packs through the forest, killing for meat as they went. It was easy for him to learn to fight like a wolf, because it was in his blood. In the evenings, when he pointed his nose at the moon and howled long and loud, he was remembering the dogs and wolves that had come before him. Chapter 3. The Wild Animal. The wild animal was strong in Buck, and as he traveled across the snow, it grew stronger and stronger. And as Buck grew stronger, he hated Spitz more and more, although he was careful never to start a fight. But Spitz was always showing his teeth to Buck, trying to start a fight. And Buck knew that if he and Spitz fought, one of them would die. The fight almost happened one night when they stopped by Lake Laberge. There was heavy snow, and it was very cold. The lake was frozen, and Francois, Perrault, and the dogs had to spend the night on the ice under a big rock. Buck had made a warm hole in the snow and was sorry to leave it to get his piece of fish. But when he had eaten and returned to his hole, he found Spitz in it. Buck had tried not to fight Spitz before, but this was too much. He attacked him angrily. Spitz was surprised. He knew Buck was big, but he didn't know he was so wild. Francois was surprised too, and guessed why Buck was angry.
"Go on, Buck,"
he shouted.
"Fight him, the dirty thief."
Spitz was also ready to fight, and the two dogs circled one another, looking for the chance to jump in. But suddenly, there was a shout from Perrault, and they saw 80 or 100 dogs around the sledge. The dogs came from an Indian village, and they were searching for the food that they could smell on the sledge. Perrault and Francois tried to fight them off with their clubs, but the dogs, made crazy by the smell of the food, showed their teeth and fought back. Buck had never seen dogs like these. They were all skin and bone, but hunger made them fight like wild things. 3 of them attacked Buck, and in seconds his head and legs were badly bitten. Dave and Solex stood side by side, covered in blood, fighting bravely. Joe and Pike jumped on one dog, and Pike broke its neck with one bite. Buck caught another dog by the neck and tasted blood. He threw himself on the next one, and then felt teeth in his own neck. It was Spitz, attacking him from the side. Perrault and Francois came to help with clubs, but then they had to run back to save the food. It was safer for the 9 sledge dogs to run away across the lake. Several of them were badly hurt, and they spent an unhappy night hiding among the trees. At first light, they returned to the sledge and found Perrault and Francois tired and angry. Half their food was gone. The Indian dogs had even eaten one of Perrault's shoes. Francois looked at his dogs unhappily.
My friends,"
he said softly.
"Perhaps those bites will make you ill. What do you think, Perrault?"
Perrault said nothing. They still had 600 kilometers to travel, and he hoped very much that his sledge dogs had not caught rabies from the Indian dogs. The harness was torn and damaged, and it was 2 hours before they were moving, traveling slowly and painfully over the most difficult country that they had been in. The 30-mile river was not frozen. It ran too fast to freeze. They spent 6 days trying to find a place to cross, and every step was dangerous for dogs and men. 12 times they found ice bridges across the river, and Perrault walked carefully onto them, holding a long piece of wood. And 12 times he fell through a bridge and was saved by the piece of wood, which caught on the sides of the hole. But the temperature was 45 degrees below zero, and each time Perrault fell into the water, he had to light a fire to dry and warm himself. Once, the sledge fell through the ice, with Dave and Buck, and they were covered in ice by the time Perrault and Francois pulled them out of the river. Again, a fire was needed to save them. Another time, Spitz and the dogs in front fell through the ice. Buck and Dave and Francois at the sledge had to pull backwards. That day, they traveled only 400 meters. When they got to the Hootalinqua and good ice, Buck and the other dogs were very, very tired. But they were late, so Perrault made them run faster. In 3 days, they went 180 kilometers and reached the Five Fingers. The other dogs had hard feet from years of pulling sledges, but Buck's feet were still soft from his easy life down south. All day he ran painfully, and when they camped for the night, he lay down like a dead dog. He was hungry, but he was too tired to walk to the fish, so Francois brought it to him. One day, Francois made 4 little shoes for him, and this made Buck much more comfortable. Francois forgot the shoes one morning, and Buck refused to move. He lay on his back with his feet in the air until Francois put the shoes on. Later, his feet grew harder, and the shoes were not needed. One morning, at the Pelly River, a dog called Dolly went suddenly mad. She howled long and loud like a wolf, and then jumped at Buck. Buck ran, with Dolly 1 step behind him. She could not catch him, but he could not escape from her. They ran half a kilometer, and then Buck heard Francois call to him. He turned and ran towards the man, sure that Francois would save him. Francois stood, holding his axe, and as Buck passed, the axe crashed down on Dolly's head. Buck fell down by the sledge, too tired to move. Immediately, Spitz attacked him and bit his helpless enemy twice, as hard as he could. But Francois saw this and gave Spitz a terrible beating for it. "He's a wild dog, that Spitz," said Perrault. "One day, he'll kill Buck."
"Buck is wilder,"
replied Francois.
"I've been watching him. One day he'll get very angry, and he'll fight Spitz. And he'll win."
Francois was right. Buck wanted to be lead dog. Spitz knew this and hated him. Buck started to help the other dogs when Spitz punished them for being lazy. One morning, Pike refused to get up, and Spitz looked for him everywhere. When he found him, he jumped at him. But suddenly, Buck attacked Spitz. The other dogs saw this, and it became more and more difficult for Spitz to lead them. But the days passed without a chance for a fight, and soon they were pulling into Dawson City on a cold, gray afternoon. They stayed in Dawson for 7 days. When they left, Perrault was carrying some more very important papers, and he wanted to travel back as fast as possible. They traveled 80 kilometers the first day, and the same the second. But it was difficult work for Francois. Buck and Spitz hated each other, and the other dogs were not afraid of Spitz anymore. One night, Pike stole half a fish from Spitz and ate it standing next to Buck. And every time Buck went near Spitz, he growled and the hair on his back stood up angrily. The other dogs fought in their harnesses, and Francois often had to stop the sledge. He knew that Buck was the problem, but Buck was too clever for him, and Francois never saw him actually starting a fight. One night in camp, the dogs saw a snow rabbit, and in a second they were all chasing it, with Spitz in front. Nearby was another camp, with 50 dogs, who also joined the chase. The rabbit was running fast on top of the snow, but the snow was soft, and it was more difficult for the dogs. When Spitz caught the rabbit, throwing it in the air with his teeth, Buck was just behind. Spitz stopped, and Buck hit him very hard. The two dogs fell in the snow. Spitz bit Buck very quickly, twice, and then jumped away, watching carefully. The time had come, and Buck knew that either he or Spitz must die. They watched one another, circling slowly. The moon was shining brightly on the snow, and in the cold, still air, not a leaf moved on the trees. The other dogs finished eating the rabbit, and then turned to watch. Spitz was a good fighter. He was full of hate and anger, but he was also intelligent. Every time Buck tried to bite his throat, he met Spitz's own teeth. Then, each time Buck attacked, Spitz moved and bit him on the side as he passed. After a few minutes, Buck was covered in blood. He attacked again, but this time turned at the last minute and went under Spitz, biting his left front leg. The bone broke, and Spitz was standing on 3 legs. Buck tried to knock Spitz down, and then repeated his earlier attack, and broke Spitz's right front leg. There was no hope for Spitz now. Buck got ready for his final attack, while the circle of 60 dogs watched and crowded nearer and nearer, waiting for the end. At last Buck jumped, in and out, and Spitz went down in the snow. A second later, the waiting pack was on top of him, and Spitz had disappeared. Buck stood and watched. The wild animal had made its kill. Chapter 4. The New Lead Dog.
Well, what did I say? Buck's a real fighter, all right,
said Francois the next morning, when he discovered that Spitz had disappeared, and that Buck was covered in blood.
Spitz fought like a wolf,
said Perrault, as he looked at the bites all over Buck.
And Buck fought like 10 wolves,
answered Francois.
And we'll travel faster now. No more Spitz, no more trouble.
Francois started to harness the dogs. He needed a new lead dog, and decided that Sol-leks was the best dog that he had. But Buck jumped at Sol-leks and took his place.
Look at Buck,
said Francois, laughing.
He's killed Spitz, and now he wants to be lead dog. Go away, Buck.
He pulled Buck away and tried to harness Sol-leks again. Sol-leks was unhappy too. He was frightened of Buck, and when Francois turned his back, Buck took Sol-leks' place again. Now Francois was angry.
I'll show you,
he cried, and went to get a heavy club from the sledge. Buck remembered the man in the red coat, and moved away. This time, when Sol-leks was harnessed as lead dog, Buck did not try to move in. He kept a few meters away, and circled around Francois carefully. But when Francois called him to his old place in front of Dave, Buck refused. He had won his fight with Spitz, and he wanted to be lead dog. For an hour, the two men tried to harness him. Buck did not run away, but he did not let them catch him. Finally, Francois sat down, and Perrault looked at his watch. It was getting late. The two men looked at one another and smiled. Francois walked up to Sol-leks, took off his harness, led him back, and harnessed him in his old place. Then he called Buck. All the other dogs were harnessed, and the only empty place was now the one at the front. But Buck did not move. "Put down the club," said Perrault. Francois dropped the club, and immediately Buck came up to the front of the team. Francois harnessed him, and in a minute the sledge was moving. Buck was an excellent leader. He moved and thought quickly, and led the other dogs well. A new leader made no difference to Dave and Sol-leks. They continued to pull hard. But the other dogs had had an easy life when Spitz was leading. They were surprised when Buck made them work hard and punished them for their mistakes. Pike, the second dog, was usually lazy. But by the end of the first day, he was pulling harder than he had ever pulled in his life. The first night in camp, Buck fought Joe, another difficult dog. And after that, there were no more problems with him. The team started to pull together and to move faster and faster.
"I've never seen a dog like Buck,"
cried Francois.
"Never. He is worth $1,000. What do you think, Perrault?"
Perrault agreed. They were moving quickly and covering more ground every day. The snow was good and hard, and no new snow fell. The temperature dropped to 45 degrees below zero and didn't change. This time, there was more ice on the 30-mile river, and they crossed in a day. Some days they ran 100 kilometers, or even more. They reached Skagway in 14 days, the fastest time ever. For 3 days the dogs rested in Skagway. Then Francois put his arms around Buck's neck and said goodbye to him. And that was the last of Francois and Perrault. Like other men, they passed out of Buck's life forever. 2 new men took Buck and his team back north on the long journey to Dawson, traveling with several other dog teams. It was heavy work. The sledge was loaded with letters for the gold miners of Dawson. Buck did not like it, but he worked hard and made the other dogs work hard too. Each day was the same. They started early, before it was light, and at night they stopped and camped, and the dogs ate. For the dogs, this was the best part of the day. First eating, then resting by the fire. Buck liked to lie by the fire, looking at the burning wood. Sometimes he thought about Mr. Miller's house in California. More often, he remembered the man in the red coat and his club, the death of Curly, the fight with Spitz, and the good things that he had eaten. But sometimes he remembered other things. These were things that he remembered through his parents, and his parents' parents, and all the dogs which had lived before him. Sometimes, as he lay there, he seemed to see, in a waking dream, a different fire. And he saw next to him, not the Indian cook, but another man, a man